I think it's humor. I think it's whimsy. I think it's something that does feel joyful, upbeat, hopeful, solving a problem. I think that people feel like the world is out of control. And so things that make them feel more in control of what they can control. And I think that's one of the reasons why there's so much emphasis on like organization and like, things being visually organized is I think people just, they're like, if I can't control the world, maybe I can control my pantry.
That's Gretchen Rubin, a 5 times New York Times bestselling author and podcaster, talking about how brands can create more meaningful connections with consumers, and my guest for this episode of Lives of Tomorrow. Gretchen's most recent book, Life in 5 Senses, is all about the everyday experiences of life through the lenses of our 5 senses, so sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, and was released on paperback on April the 18th. But today, we're talking about the emerging mindset of joy. Now, that might sound strange. We all feel joy at some point, right? How can that be an emerging mindset? But against the backdrop of the polycrisis, that's all the sad and difficult things happening in the world right now, WGSN is forecasting a need and a desire from people to feel more joy more of the time in the future and to find ways to create it. I'm Carla Buzasi, CEO of WGSN, the world's largest trend forecasting company, and you're listening to Lives of Tomorrow, the WGSN podcast about how we will live our lives in the future. So before we talk about the importance of this joyful emerging mindset, Gretchen, please can you introduce yourself to our listeners?
My name is Gretchen Rubin, and my primary identity is as a writer. I write about happiness and human nature. I'm probably best known for my book, The Happiness Project, and also Better Than Before, which is a book about habits, and the 4 Tendencies Profile, which is a personality framework that I created. But I also have a podcast called Happier with Gretchen Rubin, where every week I talk about how to be happier, healthier, more productive, and more creative. My most recent book is called Life in 5 Senses, which is about harnessing the power of our 5 senses to be happier, healthier, more productive, and more creative. Very related to joy. And then I also have a newsletter. I'm on social media. I have an app. I do all the things that a person does these days to connect with an audience about ideas.
Okay, so to kick things off, I'm going to quote something that you said, which is, "We've all been through some very tough years, and around the world we're short on happiness. We're starved for experiences that make us smile and laugh, and brands can help." How can brands make us happy?
Well, there's a lot of ways. I mean, one way that a brand can do it is by using humor with their messaging. And, humor is tricky because it's contextual. You really have to understand what makes something funny, what isn't going to land, what maybe goes too far. But when there is something that makes people laugh or smile, you just see how sticky it is and how just the delight that people take in it. So that's one. And then also is just introducing us to just little moments of joy or a product that delights us. And, you think about now how there's a lot of interest in sort of adults doing things that we associate with childhood. So, for instance, Legos. I think you've talked about Legos and how people love, like adults doing Legos now is like very common. Adult coloring books, like a lot of people are doing that. And they do it sort of almost for meditation and just like the pleasure of materials and tools. One of the things that I've been struck by is there's sort of like this new emergence of adult stickers. Like I love a sticker book, and now there are all these very kind of sophisticated sticker books out there. I'm like, some technology must have changed where now this is a really easy thing to do. So I have like more sticker books than is really appropriate for one adult to have. I've loved scratch and sniffs ever since I was little. So I think these little things where people they're surprised, they're delighted. Maybe there's a note of whimsy. There's a connection to the senses, things that just bring more like comfort or pleasure. I think we're all looking for that as a respite from when things feel dark, dreary, hopeless, combative, or difficult.
I was on a plane recently, very long journey, and I watched 3 films and 3 TV episodes and still wasn't at my final destination, but there you go.
Wow.
But they played the same ad in front of all of them, and it had this really upbeat soundtrack, and it made me smile every single time. And I just thought that was a brilliant example to everything you study into. It's just one sense, and it really helped on this very long, boring journey. But just, using sound cleverly, it made me smile. It was that simple.
That's fascinating because it's true. One research shows that one of the quickest, fastest, easiest ways to intervene in mood is through music with your favorite upbeat music. And, that's why they play it in gyms and because it makes difficult things seem easier. It lifts our spirits. But on the other, sort of like the opposite of a profound truth is also true. A very interesting trend that I've seen is the quiet airport. Like the San Francisco airport is a quiet airport, meaning they don't play music, they don't have loud announcements, and it's just so much less stressful. And I really noticed that I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is great. We don't need to have like blaring sounds all the time. And so I think it's not like, oh, upbeat music is always going to make a person's day better. It's like the right music at the right moment in the right level. Like you had control of that music. If you didn't want to listen to it, you could have just muted it. Whereas in an airport, it's like, I can't get away from that sound, even if I'm finding it overwhelming. Or like here in the United States, Walmart is having these hours in the morning where they are, for people who are have a lot of sensory sensitivities, they dim the lights. They don't have like videos playing on the television displays. They do things to just make it more calm for people who feel very overwhelmed in a place like Walmart. And I think this is so smart because, again, it's not that there's a one-size-fits-all solution. It's more like, how do we think about what we can do in the right place, in the right time, that's going to bring people this joy, but not in a way that is just going to blast them with a bunch of overloaded stimulation that might end up doing more harm than good.
Yeah, I think that is interesting. It's not one size that fits all. One person's joy might be a quiet, dimly lit room, and another person's, it might be, a crazy rave with, strobe lighting and everything.
Right. And even the same person in same situations, because it's like when you're in an airport, you're in one kind of mood when you're ready to go, so part of it is thinking about a context and what are the possibilities within that context.
So you worked on a new happiness research study. Why was it important for you to do this one? With all the balls you've just been telling me you're juggling with podcasts and books and things, the happiness study, what was it that you felt was so important at this time to understand?
Well, it's just really important to understand, like, what are the little ways that we can intervene in people's experience of their lives? And I'm always very interested in, like, what are the things that a person experiences as part of an ordinary day? Something that we experience, multiple times, maybe how many, like on average, how many advertisements and branding messages we get in a day. It is a lot. And so this is an opportunity where if there's like a little joyful moment, a little sweet moment, a little like a reminder of like a value, which a lot of times ads and brands do remind us of our transcendent values. And I think sometimes people dismiss that. But they often do remind us of like the value of connection or the value of something like traveling and novelty or challenge. So I think that it's an important element of everyday life to think about as we're thinking about how people experience their world.
In all this research, was there anything that stood out as different so that you were surprised? You've been researching happiness for years and years, but was there anything that felt different because of the time that we're in at the moment?
Well, it was humor. It was the power of humor. And I have to say, maybe I'm kind of a humorless person, but that wasn't something that I had thought a lot about. So I was sort of surprised. But then I thought, well, of course, that makes perfect sense because humor it gives you that lift. It puts everything in perspective. It makes things feel more hopeful. It's a way of engaging with other people because when we're smiling, like that's a very social thing. This is why, TV shows will use a laugh track because if I hear somebody laughing, I'm more likely to laugh. There's something very social. We're much more likely to laugh at something if we're with other people than if we're watching the same thing on our own, which is like if you're in a crowded movie theater and you're watching a comedy, everybody's laughing. You'll laugh more than if you're, watching it at home on the sofa.
And that is interesting because if you think about the way that we socialized in the past, even, you've used that example, going to watch a film at a cinema versus watching it at home. Now, cinemas do still exist, but we're not going in the numbers that we used to. We are more likely to watch it on a streaming service. So you don't get that power of another 80, 100 people getting the joke at the same time as you do.
But one of the things, back to your point about how the pandemic has changed our habits, is that people are not coming back live the way that they did before, even now. Like people are just not showing up in person. And it's funny, on the Happier podcast, this is one of the things we often say to people is like, if you can, try to show up in person because it's just different. And you're like, oh, I don't feel like putting on an outfit and dealing with how to get there. And, it's like, it's on my calendar. It feels like a hassle, but it's like, it's so much more rich and vital and engaging. We've got to all kind of push ourselves to get back out there. We got out of the habit of showing up, or maybe we got used to giving ourselves a pass. I think sometimes people are like, well, I don't want to push myself. It's like, well, sometimes we do want to push ourselves a little bit. And in the end, it'll make us happier. So I do think that there is tremendous value in the in-person. And so I'm really making an effort to
go and do things.
To go do things.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's the easier option, isn't it? It's easier to stay at home. It's easier, dare I say it without turning this into a future of work podcast, but it's easier to work from home and not have to get your makeup on and get on the train or do the long commute. But the value you get when you get there because of that interaction with other human beings is amazing.
And that's one of ancient philosophers and contemporary scientists have always agreed that for happiness, relationships are really, really important. And it's just hard to forge a strong relationship virtually. It's not impossible. And I think we're getting better and better in understanding like how you would go about doing that. But it's certainly not the way we're hardwired. And it's something that you really have to think about. If you show up, you're smelling somebody, you're touching them. Like there are people, if you have meetings that are virtual, it's very hard to remember, at least for me, people's names and faces because they're just sort of all, but then when you meet people, they're so much more distinct.
I'm just thinking at the moment, Chloe, one of my colleagues, she wears this amazing perfume and it's a Zara perfume. It's not a particularly expensive one, but she has this very distinct scent. And I always say, oh, Chloe, come closer. You smell so good.
Yes.
And that's a connection I have with her. And we laugh about it, but it's a really lovely thing. And I would not get that via a computer screen, let's face it.
Speaking of joy and brands, this is why I think anything immersive, it's like that is the buzzword, right? Immersive. It's like, this is immersive cooking display. People crave immersive because I think it holds that promise of giving us that stimulation. Because I think we're facing two kinds of problems that are in the opposite direction, but they affect us. One is things feel drained and flattened because they're coming to us behind screens. And so they don't feel rich. They don't feel vivid. And so we feel like things are kind of empty, drained. But then on the other hand, a lot of things are hyper processed and hyper saturated. So this food has been, engineered to hit every bliss point. Or you're seeing a movie and it's like, there's emotional music and there's like so many images. It's like more than you would ever see in a lifetime in a medieval village. And so you're overwhelmed in some way. But then on the other hand, like there's no smell, there's no wind in your face, you're not touching anything. So I think we feel out of balance, like we're out of whack. It's too much and not enough. And so something that is immersive, it holds this promise of like, well, maybe this will bring me back into balance. Maybe this is why people are talking about going into nature so much. Because it's like, nature is kind of like it represents like the truest balance. And it's like, okay, if I could go be in like a quiet woods, that would make me feel like I'm back into balance with my senses. And I think we're craving that.
I think that's really interesting. Things feel flat because some of the senses are dulled. Whereas when you're in nature, even in quiet nature, you'll hear, a bird tweeting or a rustling of the leaves or something like that. And actually, because it's got a quiet backdrop, it resonates so much louder as a consequence. I've got loads more questions, but I want to do the quick fire questions so we don't run out of time. So these are not necessarily anything to do with the topic in hand, although the first one very much is so, but that just happens to be the case. So just whatever comes into your head, the quickest. When are you happy?
Ooh, when I'm reading on a sofa.
What do you rarely share about yourself?
How much Diet Coke I drink.
How much Diet Coke do you actually drink? Everyone wants to know now.
As much as I want. Which is a lot.
However big or small, what one day-to-day life hack couldn't you live without? And you're not allowed to say Diet Coke to that one.
Okay. I have what's called a bandolier, which is a thing that you put on your smartphone. That means that you can wear it on a strap around your neck. And I got this so that when I would travel, I wouldn't, accidentally leave my phone behind on an airplane counter. But now I wear it around. You've got one. There you go.
My family teased me about it so much when I got it, but it's brilliant, isn't it? I can walk around with it, I don't lose my phone, it gives me free hands all the time.
1,000%. No, and my sister calls me a happiness bully, and I'm like, this is not something that you wear for style points.
Okay, what was the last TV show you binged and had to recommend?
Ooh, the last one I binged, I think, was Better Call Saul, which is really, really good. I watched Breaking Bad too. I love Breaking Bad, but I like Better Call Saul even better.
Okay, last quickfire question. When and how do you prioritize yourself?
Well, I do that all the time. That comes pretty naturally to me. So I'm really good about my bedtime. my exercise. I go to the Met every day. That was one of the exercises I did for Life in Five Senses, and I still keep it up, going to the Metropolitan Museum. I'm a writer, so I'm by myself all the time, but I make sure that I have plenty of social time. I'm pretty good at that.
So getting back to the topic in hand, another of my colleagues, Martina Rocca, wrote that a member of Forrester's Consumer Voices market research online community, bit of a mouthful, says, "I'm looking for brands that make me happy, make me relax, and then put me in a good mood to help me escape." So my question to you is, why are we asking brands to do that? Why can't we find these things in our own lives?
Well, that is a very good question. But I do think a brand can help us connect the dots between what we're seeking and how to get there. Because a lot of times, for instance, I use a sunscreen that has this very strange texture. It's a slippery texture.
You're not convincing me to buy this sunscreen.
No, but here's the thing. I'm like, it's probably very controversial. I bet some people love it and some people do not like it. This is one of the, writing Life in Five Senses, one of the things that surprised me is it turns out silky is very controversial. I thought, I love velvet, I love silk. I thought everybody likes silk. It turns out, no, a lot of people really it gives them kind of the chills, something that's slippery. So I bet that this is a product where some people love it because they love the slipperiness or kind of the uncanniness of it. And then other people, it's a real turnoff. But like every time I put on that sunscreen, I'm like, whoa, this is an interesting texture. It elevates my experience. And I'm constantly telling people, oh, you got to try this sunscreen. It's bananas. I feel like, ooh, I really want to experience that for myself. I remember somebody was, because I talking about taste, people were talking about toothpaste. You can get flavored toothpaste. And I was like, mango flavored toothpaste? I have to experience that for myself. And I bought some because I was just like, that is just strange, right? Like, what would that be like? And so again, it's sort of like, it's this desire to engage or have a little bit of whimsy, a little bit something unexpected. And a brand can sometimes connect that for us.
Yeah, because again, it's coming away from the flatness. So if everything is very controlled and you know these things really, really well, then when something does something different, it shocks you out of that sort of status quo. And I can think about that with food. I was actually having this conversation weirdly with my husband at lunch today, that now your supermarket shop is on an algorithm and it, fills your basket for you. You tend to eat the same thing all the time. And I like those things, but I'm missing out on that, that tastes different. Because I get the same stuff in my supermarket delivery every single week.
I had a friend who told me that her favorite thing was to go to a country where she didn't speak the language, go into a grocery store and buy something where she did not know what it was, and then eat it. And she's like, sometimes it's sweet, sometimes it's salty. And I thought, wow, that is just like food roulette, But again, because she clearly is experiencing what you're saying, I want to somehow enliven my natural inclinations. And I am somebody who likes to eat the same food over and over again. But it becomes, then nothing's memorable because it's the same plate of scrambled eggs. And as good as they are, you're never going to remember this plate of scrambled egg versus that.
So with all the success that you've had and the books and the podcast and, the interviews, et cetera, which of those hats gives you the most happiness? Which do you get the most fulfillment out of?
Writing. That's my primary identity. And I've written whole huge things that I was preoccupied with color. You like color.
We do.
I went through this period where I was just so preoccupied with color. I was just reading book after book after book and doing all these, And then I wrote this whole thing, which nobody is interested in. I've shown it to 5 people and they're like, well, you really had fun with that, didn't you? And I'm like, I did. I just couldn't help myself. So for me, that is the core thing, is actually writing.
We could turn this into a whole color podcast. Color is so important.
Yes.
It's so important.
Love color. Oh my gosh. It's limitlessly fascinating.
Yeah. So coming back to brands as well, what do you think brands will have to do from here on in if they want to engage with consumers through this topic that we're talking about? What's the thing to start today so that you're going to meet your consumer of tomorrow?
I think it's humor. I think it's whimsy. I think it's something that does feel joyful, upbeat, hopeful, solving a problem. I think that people feel like the world is out of control. And so things that make them feel more in control of what they can control. So I think this is why a lot of people, I wrote a little book called Outer Order, Inner Calm, because for so many people, outer order contributes to inner calm. And I think that's one of the reasons why there's so much emphasis on like organization and like, things being visually organized is I think people just, they're like, if I can't control the world, maybe I can control my pantry. So things like that make kind of everyday life.
So your advice to brands is if you want to resonate with the consumer of tomorrow, then it's about making people laugh. So it's humor, which is, I think that's really interesting because it's more than just joy, isn't it? It's actually making people have a physical reaction to something. Because if it's funny, you do smile or you laugh out loud. And that's, that again, coming back to, your work on senses, you're getting different senses within something rather than just, oh, it makes me feel something, actually makes me do something.
So maybe delight is the bigger word. So it's humor. You can delight people through humor, but you can also delight them through just something being so pleasing or so unexpected, just like that little pop.
I think that's brilliant. Are you more anxious or hopeful about the future?
I'm more hopeful.
And is that because through this lens and the research you've done, you can see people, not just consumers, but people finding ways to seek out happiness? Or is it because you can see businesses and brands switching on to doing the right thing and making people happier?
I guess I just hope that the resilience of people and then in the end, their fundamental desire to be good people will, over the long haul, allow us to make good choices, better choices overall.
Okay. Gretchen, thank you so much. That's been really fascinating and a really upbeat conversation, as it should be when you're talking about happiness and joy and humor and things like that. I think it should feel good while you're doing it.
Well, thank you so much. I so enjoyed it.
Thank you so much to the author and podcaster Gretchen Rubin for joining us on Lives of Tomorrow. Next week, WGSN's Create Tomorrow podcast is back with another episode discussing colour with British artist and designer Yinka Ilori. I'm Carla Buzasi, CEO of WGSN. I'll see you next time.